Okay, officers, order please, Mr. Marr. Okay, welcome everybody. I'll go through the usual script first of all. I'm Councillor Jason Zackley, Cabinet Member for Safety in the Community, and I'll be chairing this meeting. So housekeeping rules first of all. If the continuous fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the room and public gallery by the stairwells. Do not attempt to use the lifts. Please assemble near Queen Victoria's statue in Guildhall Square. In order to comply with the Guildhall Trust fire marshal regulations, anyone who signed in at the Guildhall reception desk should sign out when leaving the building at the end of today's meeting. And everyone speaking via a microphone will be recorded and broadcast on the website, including those making deputations, but we do not have any deputations. Members of the public and press, of which there are none either, are also permitted to record the meeting on the understanding that neither disrupts the meeting nor records those stating explicitly they do not wish to be recorded. Please can everyone use the microphones and remember to switch them off when they are finished in order for the camera to move to the next person speaking. We have all read the reports, presumably. So officers, please just highlight any developments that have occurred since publication. So I'll now formally move on to the agenda. First item of which is, if you bear with me, that's where I put it. That's very good. Sorry. Apologies for absence. Thank you, George. One apology so far, Jane, I believe, which is from Councillor John Smith, opposition spokesperson for the Conservative Group. No other apologies. Item 2, declaration of members' interests. Colleagues, any interests? No interest. Okay. Also, I suppose we ought to do introductions. It's not part of my schedule, but I'll do introductions. I've already introduced myself, so if I can rather conveniently move to my left.
Councillor Kirsty Mellor, Labour Opposition Spokesperson.
And to my right.
Councillor George Magic, the Paulsgrove Ward Opposition Spokesperson.
And there are only 3 officers present. Officers, we'd also like to introduce yourselves as well.
Bruce Marr, Head of Partnership and Planning, Children, Families and Education.
Edward Skinner, Regulatory Services Lead.
Steve Bell, Regulatory Services Lead.
Jane Didino, Local Democracy Officer.
Okay, that's introductions done. Thank you, everybody. Moving on. This is a relatively short agenda today, so the meeting may not take too long, but obviously there are items that we do need to conclude today. Item 3 on the agenda is additional funding to support the victims of domestic abuse. Bruce, I believe you're leading on this item. Can I pass across to you? Thank you. Just to do a brief intro.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, this is additional funding identified by Cabinet of £28,000 to support victims of domestic abuse for 1 year. The recommendation and request is for this funding to be allocated to train new staff to our Family Safeguarding Service in Children, Families and Education to deliver DDP, Didactic Development Psychotherapy. As an authority, we've trained a number of members of staff already, and it's expanding that provision. Those trained will be working with families where there is domestic abuse in the home and where the threshold and impact on the children are so significant it's reached Tier 4, so we're talking about a need for statutory intervention. And the idea being to reduce the risks of domestic abuse on the children and within the relationship within that home environment. The funding to support the full training programme and support delivery, it also requires ongoing supervision, so funding is being requested that the full committal for delivery is to March 24, so that we ensure that the training takes about 6 months. They have the first training, then the second level of training. In between they have supervision and then support afterwards to make sure it's fully embedded.
Very succinct. Thank you very much indeed, Bruce, for that. I say it's relatively straightforward, not a huge amount of money, but a useful contribution to make towards what's obviously, I'd guess, I can't speak on behalf of everybody, I'm pretty sure that all colleagues share an interest in trying to tackle this as an issue. So any questions, colleagues, in regards to the report?
I don't have any questions as such, but I just wanted to update. I don't know if you got the email about the question that I asked at the briefing meeting. And basically the question that I asked was what process were the police using at the time during the increase of referrals, and what processes are in place now. And Hayden kindly responded to that question for us, so thank you to Hayden for that. And I believe it was around consent issues and non-uptake of services as well, and those particular victims, because I was worried because there was 405 of them where they were put, and I believe they're now going through the MASH team. Is that correct, Bruce?
So yes, the police change air process is where they would forward any attendance from response and patrol, so 999 calls, any medium or high risk. They change that process for all mediums. They'd refer to the provider services. What that did was increase demand significantly, but also it reduced the capacity of the provider service to respond appropriately. So what happened was that involvement for victims, actually the numbers who engaged decreased because of the demand being focused on the initial referrals. The police have changed their process now, so it's more with consent and more within the police MASH, so not the local authority MASH process, it's the police MASH process, who sit within the respective MASH teams to ensure there is more active consent from the victim, and numbers have returned to the same levels as previous, so the provider service can manage that within the commission provision and not requiring any additional funding.
Thank you, Kirsty. George, any questions or comments?
No, nothing on this report, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Bruce. The report is basically for noting, so I think that's noted. Thanks for the intro and for bringing that, Bruce. Thank you very much indeed. Moving on, item 4, Food Operating Safety Plan.
Good afternoon, councillors. Thank you for the opportunity to present the Food Safety Operating Plan for 2022 to 23. As I'm sure you're aware, the Food Standards Agency requires local authorities to produce a food safety plan annually, detailing how we, as the competent authority, plan to discharge our responsibilities under the Food Safety Law Code of Practice. The plan before you today covers the recovery from the pandemic, as well as the usual elements as the food business profile, the organisational structure of business priorities of Portsmouth City Council and regulatory services as it relates to food safety, the scope of service, the resources and performance review. And of course the overall aim of the plan is to ensure food in any business setting is safe. We currently achieve this by education and enforcement, inspections which are risk-based, sampling for both micro and chemical, and preventing the spread of infectious foodborne diseases. We also deliver these functions at Portsmouth Port via our Port Health Authority, which also is under our regulatory services wing, although some of those facts are delayed at the moment due to the change of direction with regard to port checks, which are being currently rethought nationally. Some facts and figures. Portsmouth has approximately 6,800 businesses, 2,000 of which are food-based. These are mixed across the full spectrum from manufacturer, transport, catering and retail. And the risk profile as of the 31st of March, there were 5 0 rated premises, 37 1 rated, 37 2 rated, 136 rated 3, 265 rated 4 and 1,557 rated 5, and as of the 31st of March 277 were not yet rated. I had hoped to provide you with an update, but unfortunately our database is currently down, but I am happy to provide that as soon as we're able to get those figures for you as of today. The Food Standards Agency Recovery Plan has sought to address issues with food businesses and inspections which have been significantly impacted by the pandemic. And in September 2021, the Food Standards Agency published Phase 1, which was from July to September 2021. And the aim was to prioritise new businesses for interventions based on risk and the planning of interventions from September 2021 onwards, and Phase 2 from October 21 to 2023-24. And delivery of the intervention programme, which is ongoing, there are milestones for high-risk premises. From the latest checks, we've been successful with phase 1 of the plan, and we are working on phase 2 as it's ongoing. During the pandemic, we sent various mail shots to food businesses and worked with the businesses that were allowed to remain operating during the close down period, setting out advice on how to operate safely. We also work with the UK Health Security Agency on infectious foodborne outbreaks. And as said before, there are currently, our resources are 3 full-time equivalents. That's just, as I say, a brief summary of the plan, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions, colleagues?
Nothing further than what I did the other day. No.
And nothing further from me.
Okay. Yeah, just so many members of the public that are watching, we do hold a pre-briefing prior to coming to the full portfolio meeting, where again, colleagues have the opportunity to ask questions of officers there and then. I think very much as my colleagues have just stated, much the same from me basically. It's a good report. I'm glad the figures overall are fairly favourable. Obviously, if you can update us at some point in the future, that will be useful. I don't suspect any significant change, but it's useful to keep on top of the figures. So thank you very much. The report is for noting, and it is duly noted by me in my position as Cabinet Member. Sorry, in effect, yes, well, I'm not going to disagree with the recommendation, so I will agree the recommendations as they stand, the recommendation as it stands. No disagreement to that from anybody, but ultimately the power lies with the Cabinet Member, so be it. But yeah, thank you very much indeed. Thanks for coming along and presenting it. Thank you. Lastly, item 5 on the agenda, which is across to EU Ed Trading Standards, Threats, Challenges and Solutions 2022 to 2024.
Thank you, and good afternoon, councillors. Yes, as per the title of this report, this is an opportunity to inform the Cabinet Member about the increasing pressures and demands on the service that we are currently seeing but are going to materialise over the next couple of years, and to offset them against, give you an information about the capacity that we have currently and the information we have to hand as to whether that capacity will increase or not, that will be available to potentially meet those pressures going forward. So there is a certain amount of concern around the report, because obviously it's talking about the threats and problems facing us, but it's also going to hopefully introduce some possible solutions that should mitigate those problems as well. The first section of the report goes into a very brief overview of trading standards functions. I won't read through it, but they're quite diverse and they cover all aspects of consumer protection around the purchase of goods and services, some of which are very old, some around metrology and weights and measures, and some which are maybe more modern, which are reflective of the modern markets that we have to protect. The service is intelligence-led, so by that I mean we respond to complaints. So in contrast to the food plan you just heard, where that's very prescriptive and it's inspection-based and you classify risk and you go through the process, we don't quite know. We need more of a crystal ball. We don't quite know what's facing us in the weeks and months ahead, other than the breadth of the legislation that we have a statutory duty to enforce, and that's the key nub of that really. To give you a bit of some figures of assistance, there's approximately about 250 to 270 pieces of legislation that the Trading Standards Services either has a statutory duty or a power to enforce in the UK law. And against that, I have 7.6 FTE members of staff to cover all those different roles and responsibilities, which are quite wide and diverse. The local demand on Portsmouth trading standards, and I'll use that by way of complaints, said we're intelligence-led. The vast majority of our intelligence and complaints basis comes from Citizens Advice Consumer Service. They operate a first-tier consumer complaints hub for the whole of the UK, and the way the system's supposed to work is if you have a problem with a business over goods and services you bought, you're supposed to make contact with the Citizens Advice Consumer Service. They will give you advice, they'll triage your situation, your issue, and they may be able to resolve it for you over the phone or via email. if it's a purely civil matter and it's something that they deem the consumer can resolve themselves. However, unsurprisingly, there are many situations which can't be resolved, and they don't just fall into a civil issue. They may have criminal elements as well, and in those circumstances, the Citizens Advice Service will refer those complaints to the relevant local authority trading standards service, and that will be very much dependent on where the consumer and the business is based, and where how that transaction is taken place. So just some numbers then. So the local demand in Portsmouth, we received somewhere between 1,400 complaints via Citizens Advice Consumer Service in both the years 2020 to 21 and 21 to 22. That was a very much suppressed figure because of COVID, and we are seeing in the first quarter of this year a resurgence in those figures. So we are starting to see recovery with over 500 complaints in the first quarter of 2022-2023, and a detriment figure as well, much higher. When I say detriment figure, you are able to conduct some reports through the portal with Citizens Advice to ascertain the level of financial detriment that the aggregate number of complaints comes to. So again, going back to those previous years, we were looking around £2 million local detriment to consumers across the 4 quarters. We're now seeing over 1 million in just the 1 quarter of 2022 to 2023, so quite a large resurgence in detriment figures. So that's where we get most of our local demand on service from, so that's about 95% of it. There are other drivers as well. Obviously, we have complaints coming through different means, but there are obviously regional and national work streams that we sign up to as well, because trading standards, whilst it's a function of the local authority, it does have regional and national influence and organisations where we get involved in projects. And those projects, good examples of those projects recently this year would be supporting the work of National Trading Standards SCAMS team, which is all about protecting and minimising the harm caused by mass marketing scams, the likes of like the fake lotteries, the fake prize draws, opportunities to earn money, get rich quick, those types of schemes, of which there is almost an infinite number of species of them. They're constantly, whenever there's a crisis or there's a new vulnerability, there'll be a new scam that comes to try to prey on the vulnerable people. So we're working closely with the national team there to try and minimise the harm to consumers in Portsmouth. But also other projects around rogue letting agents. That's another a big piece of work that's been ongoing for a while now, because the laws have changed around fees on which the way in which letting agents have to make sure they're very transparent, and there's certain things they can't charge for which they used to. Another good example would be trying to minimise the supply of illicit tobacco and illicit alcohol that is sadly to say in every area of the country, but certainly Portsmouth is got a problem as well. So we do a lot of work around that. I've included a section on performance in the report at paragraph 6, really for more information. It's a little bit of a double-edged sword to include it. It's interesting if you turn over, there's a table over on page 4 which gives a very high-level summary of some prosecution outcomes over the last year, which I'm proud to say should illustrate some very successful outcomes, and it gives you a bit of an understanding of what type of cases we're taking to court and prosecuting, what type of offenders, and what are the penalties, what are the actual outcomes as well, which hopefully gives some confidence that we are trying our best to provide some protections in those circumstances. When I say it's a double-edged sword, though, prosecutions can be it's a far too oversimplistic way to show it as a measure of performance. By far the most voluminous outcome, it doesn't require prosecution or any enforcement. We were able to resolve issues or seek compliance voluntarily. Of course, there are other enforcement outcomes other than performance, other than prosecutions as well. So I thought I'd just make that abundantly clear. Coming on to section 7, then the capacity and competencies. This is the nub of this report. This and paragraph 8. So, like I said, we've got 7.6 FTE. And some of those FTE have specialist roles, so they're not necessarily dealing with frontline complaints. For instance, one of those FTE is a solicitor that we've employed to prosecute and case manage some of our work. Another is specifically concerned with and part funded by public health around minimising harm around tobacco and alcohol, certainly in underage sales and the illegal counterfeit versions of those products. So that gives a bit more context as to the capacity of the team that I have available to deal with all the other things. Also, the competency issue as well that we have going creates some concern, because obviously what comes with skilled staff requires quite long lead-in times and lots of resource required to train staff, make sure people are appropriately trained and can be able to do the jobs that we're expecting of them. The CTSI, the Chartered Trading Standards Institute survey conducted a couple of years ago, shows some pretty alarming statistics around the competency levels in the profession generally, but also the numbers that are leaving the profession and not being replaced. And we see similar issues here in Portsmouth. I think I could probably say it's our capacity is probably about, in terms of FTE, is probably about 50% lower today than it was when I started. That's probably an easier measure than talking about budgets, because budgets can be quite, the numbers alone don't speak to the context of what I'm trying to say. So to talk about FTE, numbers of staff, we've probably got half the number today than we did over 10 years ago. So setting that problem against the context of what I think is coming our way, horizon scanning at Section 8. So we've got chronic issues with the criminal justice system at present. You're probably all aware, with barristers going on strike, which is causing backlogs to cases, including ours. And I can say that over the last month we've had at least three cases pushed back into next year now, which will have a knock-on effect on performance and have a knock-on effect on those witnesses, those defendants. It's not a good situation. It will hamper the performance figures for next year. More meaning so, though, is the additional burdens. I talked about additional burdens, so I've given on page 6 a couple of examples of what I mean by additional burdens. So these are new requirements, new duties that are coming our way with very little by means of new capacity to fulfil them. So the Offensive Weapons Act, changes to regulations on energy performance certificates, the cosmetic fillers legislation are just examples. That's not an exhausted list. They're just examples of things that are either happening now or very soon. They're going to happen very soon, and we're going to have to be able in a position to deliver potentially on enforcement issues that we don't currently have to do now. And with access to funding that is limited, and I say limited because there's a section on new burden funding, and I think I spoke at the briefing about that, where it's not ring-fenced, it don't automatically come to my budget. I need to be able to prove that I need an additional person, and if you're providing me with, let's just say £5,000, I can't employ someone new for £5,000, so therefore, more often than not, the money doesn't come to my service, it goes somewhere else. New reforms are also underway through the consultation paper, the government's 2021 consultation paper on consumer protection reforms. That's included there, which actually talks about quite a comprehensive rewrite of some consumer rights and consumer protection legislation. And whilst nothing's set in stone yet, we do have a programme for it, and we know it's coming our way. There will be, again, it's evidence of new demand, heightened demand on the service, which at the moment we don't have new money for. So that's why that's included. The rest of page 7, of course, also then talks to the same issue. It won't go surprising to you that the issues like cost of living crisis and climate change are included there, because obviously they provide fresh opportunities for problems to occur. So if we take climate change as a good example, the rapidly increasing cost of gas and electricity will be the catalyst for a whole new wave of retrofitting to domestic and commercial properties to minimise our reliance on fossil fuel heating systems, for instance. That industry will then be rolled out to vulnerable people, vulnerable consumers, and as our experience has said in previous green scheme type government-backed environmental schemes, there will always be an element of unscrupulous traders that will exploit that, and there will be people that are caught up in the mess around being inappropriately sold products and services that are not good for them. It will also be a vehicle for people to commit fraud that we'll have to deal with. So again, with the cost of living crisis and consumer vulnerability, will provide new opportunities and heightened demand on our service. So that's all the doom and gloom bit over. The last bit is including paragraph 9, which talks about potential solutions. There's three tiers to these solutions. One is apprenticeships. I took the view in the absence of new money, which is always very hard to come by in local government, and in the absence of that, we saw the next best solution would be to utilise the apprenticeship levy. And last year, I was successful working with colleagues in procurement and the apprenticeship team. We managed to add the regulatory compliance officer as a level 4 qualification to the suite of courses that PCC could offer, and we currently have one member of staff going through that programme now, which will increase his skills, knowledges and behaviours, his competencies, and he should be able to provide, he'd be able to contribute a lot more to the team than he previously would be able to. So we're pushing that, and we're going to be looking to utilise that more. There's a level 6 apprenticeship coming, which should be available as a degree level apprenticeship, which will be coming in the spring. Hopefully, I've just had confirmation since the briefing that that's much more likely than it was when I spoke to you on the 6th of this month. And again, that will be another opportunity for us to look at improving on our skills, our competencies and our capacity issues when we're looking against all those 270 responsibilities that we might have to fulfil. We can look to utilising that at relatively low cost. Obviously there is a cost with time and cost with if we're doing one thing we can't do another, but it's the next best thing to having new money and new people. So that's apprenticeships. The second possible solution is traded services. Now, this is not a new solution. We've always tried to provide traded services. It's one of the efficiencies that, ever since the start of austerity, that we were looking at, and we've developed it ever since. And when I say traded services, we have a small suite of primary authority relationships with businesses in Portsmouth, where they pay for our advice, and we can recover our costs of dealing with their specific issues where they wouldn't ordinarily be able to access that service from their regulators to a certain extent. So we have that ongoing. That generates a significant amount of income every year that we use to support the service. The second good example of traded services is other expertise that we can offer other local authorities or other agencies, and we have a particular a good example in financial investigation at Portsmouth, I'm happy to say, and we currently support a number of local authorities and a number of other agencies on their investigations, on their enforcement, where they don't have that skill set, and we recover quite a bit of money through that process as well, and that will continue. On that second tier, I'm hopeful that there are some increased income streams this year through that process. So I'm optimistic that we'll have some realistic opportunity to provide some solutions. The third and last is grant funding, and I wouldn't normally include that here, have it not been for that I've got the opportunity to apply for some funding through the Home Office, which I'm very confident and optimistic I will get, and that will provide. We'll have to provide a service for it nationally, but it will provide a significant amount of income for the next 2 years, which will help, again, support service and help maintain, give us some robustness and some resilience in our budget, and take a little bit of pressure off having to juggle the need to create income and create efficiencies, of which there's not any real efficiencies left to create. It's all about trying to maximise income to offset against our the cost of service, cost of delivering service. So those are the three areas. The reasons for the actual recommendations we're asking for you to approve today, councillors, is that you acknowledge first and foremost the increasing duties and pressures on Portsmouth trading standards. Secondly, that you acknowledge the levels of resourcing currently available to the team, to the service, is I don't want to use the word inadequate, but it is. It's going to be challenging to provide. If all those new burdens and requirements come to bear, it will be choices over what we don't want, what we can't do anymore. But thirdly, I'd like to prove the way in which we're trying to mitigate those growing problems and threats as set out in the report. And that's all I'm going to say on that, so I'm happy to take some questions.
Ed, thank you, and I think I'll take my privilege of going first and responding to that. I mean, it was useful for you to go through that paper. You spent some time doing so, but it gives the opportunity, with no members of the public here, but hopefully if there's anybody watching online, they can be appraised of the actual situation that's facing this individual service within Portsmouth City Council. It's one area that's of concern to me since taking over the portfolio back in May and going through the various aspects of it. I asked, well, we've spoken outside of this, and I've asked you to bring a paper to me to bring to my Cabinet colleagues next week, because I am concerned, and that's probably an understatement, there's a daunting workload for you and your colleagues to take on board such a minimal amount of resources dealing with such an exhaustive area. And I think I ought to go on record to basically thank you and your colleagues for the work you've done so far in what I can only admit are difficult circumstances. I think it's right for us to publicise any successful prosecutions we get, but that's just a small aspect, and the options that you've given, while at the end trying to be optimistic, I think in reality, Ed, are offering limited or short-term address to what's a much larger problem. So I take it on board, my responsibility as the Cabinet member, to try and get some progress in this, and hopefully I can bring that to bear with colleagues within Cabinet to realise that this needs some, in my opinion, urgent focus to it. It's one of two papers I've asked to be brought next week, but this one's being discussed sort of here today. Colleagues, any comments from either or questions from Kirsty or George? George, you can go first this time if you've got any.
Yeah, just a point of clarification. You said obviously that the chances are you might be faced with a situation where you have to make a choice of things that you prioritise or essentially don't even do. Where does that leave us as a council from a statutory or a legal perspective if we start to drop the ball on certain aspects? I guess that leaves us in a pickle.
Yes, I mean, obviously, we're already doing the prioritisation assessments of things we take on. So whenever we consider actually taking complaint through to actually, now this is a live investigation, it's already gone through an objective triage, for want of a better phrase, so it ticks enough boxes to say, yes, this is more worthy than something else. But you're absolutely right. You can only stretch things so far, and I think in the director's comments at the end, it goes into some narrative where it says, we'll be, the bar will be getting even higher to the point, something's going to have to be even more of detriment for us to warrant us taking it on, and there'll be more and more which we're not able to take on. To answer your question in another way, Councillor, obviously statutory duties, if you fail to fulfil them, you can come across not just the reputational, but you can also legal challenge. There's been councils around the country that have been taken a judicial review, for instance, for not doing something that they're tasked with doing.
So, thanks for that. So, put very bluntly, because I think a lot of the time when people watch, for example, we are privy to certain information, obviously being opposition spokespeople and obviously being a Cabinet member. And sometimes when people look from an outside perspective, it can maybe seem a bit confusing or not as straight and narrow. So, putting it very bluntly, I mean, obviously I know we've got the Cabinet member here, but myself and Kirsty, have groups, and budget season is upon us, and if it's something that we feel passionate about, it's certainly stuff that we can lobby within our groups for funding and for support, and obviously take that to the administration to try and support Jason in his Cabinet role. So, I mean, put very bluntly, I mean, what would you need to make this a more acceptable level? Yeah, I know it's a big ballpark, but we've got to go there as opposition people as things, and we've got to go to our group and we've got to say, look, this is what's important to us, this is what's important to our council, and then we approach the administration and say, look, if you want our support as a group, this is what we expect from you, and then hopefully that can in turn support Jason. So what would you like us to go and say, look, this is what we need?
I'll try and answer that with a degree of so if I, for instance, if I turn to the report to the bit on performance, I think there's a paragraph and there's some narrative around at any one time there's about 30 investigations. Those are viable investigations that most likely will end up for could potentially go all the way to a prosecution because the situation's wide enough. That's against the backdrop of me having less than 3 FTE of actual investigating staff that will be dealing with those cases. If I was to have 2 more, for instance, 2 more full-time principal level, and when I say principal level, senior investigators, then you could probably double that at any one time. There still would be a pinch points in terms of legal resources and other resources that won't have changed, but I could turn those 30 into 50 a year, 50 at any one time perhaps, or it'd be foolish for me to say I'd be able to increase the number of outcomes as per the table, because who knows whether those new cases would end up in a prosecution. But I suppose the long and short of it is, at the moment, we're only able to deal with a very small number and take it all the way through the process and seek redress and seek justice for people that need it. If I had more man hours to be able to do that, it would have a significant impact. So 2 to 3 FTE would probably it'd make a massive difference. And I say that in maybe a jumbled way because I've never had it and I've always been on the back foot and trying to resist savings or minimise income targets, or to make things balance. But if I was to be, if all things were equal and I had you suddenly go, well, there's 3 FTE, there's 3 principal officers. What can you deal with it? It would be a massive improvement in consumer protection for the residents of Portsmouth. It sounds outlandish, but that small amount of injection of resource
makes such a big difference.
Would make a big difference.
To something that's actually real. I mean, I don't think people understand how important this particular portfolio is as a whole to the entire of Portsmouth. I mean, we look after, let's say, everything from community safety, wardens, food and hygiene, as you say, trade and standards. It's such an important portfolio in part of the council. So I agree. Although I don't expect any, obviously, figures now, I'd appreciate, whether this be through yourself, Jason, or through one of the members, if we could kind of get a figure of what it would cost to add 2 more people to this group at some stage, so that me and Kirsty can at least speak to our counterparts in our party, because I think it would be a really valuable source to add on to the council. And bearing in mind we waste money in certain areas, I'm sure if we cut some of those wasted sections and put them into something more vital, that would be important. But thank you for your time. Thank you.
Thank you, George. Kirsty?
Thank you, Jason, and thank you for bringing that report. Like you, George, after we had our briefing meeting, I did go back to my group because I have huge concerns and the same concerns as you about how you're managing. And I just want to acknowledge my thanks to you and your team for everything that you've been doing under very difficult circumstances. As George says, community safety is so important to our residents, and it's one of the things that we hear on the doorstep all the time. And as George said again, it could be anything from antisocial behaviour to domestic abuse to trade-in standards. And when we've got safe communities, we've got thriving communities as well. So I think it's really, really important that the Trade and Standards Department is funded properly with staff in order for you to undertake your role effectively and keep Portsmouth safe. So I appreciate Jason taking that to Cabinet, and certainly, George, we will be working with our group about increasing the budget for your service. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I think just to finish before I move on to doing the recommendations rather than making a gaffe and saying it's just a report for noting this time, I think all of us are kind of singing from the same hymn sheet on this one. You said it's up to us to make the decisions. Thank you. It technically falls down to the administration and the portfolio holder, but saying that, this will be a budgetary issue unless I can do anything about it beforehand. And again, for the benefit of anyone watching, for members of the public, the process for this will be each group will come up shortly to do its own budgetary process, and so it's up to us as groups, I think, including the administration obviously, to include what they can do to address any areas of problem that they identify. I've certainly spotted this as an area of concern, hence the reason why I'm trying to get my colleagues to recognise that as such. And I'm sure, as you heard from both opposition spokespersons that are here today, they acknowledge it as a difficulty as well. Portsmouth is currently a minority administration, so it's very likely that there'll be a compromised budget that will go through. So when it comes down to that, then I will wait to see what each of us in our respective groups include in our various budgets or our individual budgets to see whether we can bring in an issue, a sort of funding issue for certain, to try and help out trading standards. I think the report and your explanation, Ed, speaks for itself. I mean, 50% plus cut in staff reductions, nearly 50% budget cuts, no one completing any courses in 15 years. And this is a city of, 220,000 people. And as you say, constantly, even just the aspect of scamming alone, one part of trading standards, vast area of responsibility, is continually on the upcrease. So I could go on probably for some considerable time more, but I think I'll sum up by saying, we recognise it, and now leave it to the politicians to see what we can do to try and alleviate you and your team that have been struggling on for so many years to try and do it. Right, moving back to the recommendations, there are 3 recommendations which just falls upon me to say I agree, but I don't think I've disagreed so far. Recommendations 1, 2 and 3, on the paper as it stands. I don't have a gavel, so I should use my pen. I agree those recommendations. Okay, and that brings an end to today's somewhat, well, not as brief as I thought, but today's community safety meeting, or safety in the community. Thank you for the 3 officers that are remaining for your time today. Thank you to my 2 opposition colleagues that are here. See you at the next one. Thank you very much. Meeting over.